Shalom Aleichem. How's it going, everybody? So, this week I wanted to continue with the Parsha theme, or the theme of talking about the Parsha, even though this is not, typical for this class. I just think, right now we're reading about the Makot, we're reading about the plagues, as they say in English. And so, hi Jeanette, welcome. So I just made a little intro. We're gonna continue talking about the Parsha of the week because it's just so relevant, even by Noachites, even by non-Jews, because it's happening to non-Jews. So just as like a recap, last week we had 7 of the 10 plagues, and this week we have 3, the last 3. And as I explained last week, plagues, it's an English word, but really they're called makot because a makkah in Hebrew is like a smack. And so basically, Hashem is like smacking the Egyptians, right? It's not like he's bringing like sickness, like sure, like yeah, the boils, they got infected with like a skin disease or whatever, but like, that's really the only plague. Everything else, there's no sickness really involved, at least not by the humans. And so this week is Parashat Bo, and basically the synopsis is that Hashem tells Moshe to go to Pharaoh again, and tell him to, if he doesn't let the people go, he's going to do this, that, and the other, and basically ruin everybody's life, which he does. And then so this week we have the makot of the locusts and the darkness and the death of the firstborn. And what's the significance? So the first of the last 3 plagues is the locusts. And so what happened is Hashem basically sent a swarm of locusts that the likes of which has never been seen before this time, and will never happen again. Which, I have a question about that because it also happens in the book of Job or Eov, and it's a little different, there's slight differences, right? Like in Eov, there's multiple species of locusts, and here it's just one species, and it's like another thing. But the point is that it was just like an overwhelming amount of locusts, and, for those people who don't live in agricultural areas, it's a little bit difficult to appreciate what this is, because you think, oh, what is it? Like it's just a bunch of grasshoppers. Like, what's the problem? Well, the problem is they eat everything in sight. And the last week we already had destruction of agriculture from the not just the stampede from all the animals, but also from the hailstorm. That was also like hail with fire inside. So they already had their crops wiped out. All of their livestock died. And then, that was another makkah. And then by the first makkah, the plague of the blood, right? All the fish died. So pretty much all their, means of sustenance are gone. There's really interesting by the locusts. What happened with the locusts is they infested so much, and they caused so much damage that they you might think like, well, what did they eat? Like, right, all the crops died by the other makot. Like, what did they have to eat? And the commentaries explain that there were little sprouts that were so small that they weren't able to be damaged either by the hail or by the stampede of animals. And so this is what the locusts went to go attack. I'm sorry. And so this is coming to teach the Egyptians that even, you might think like, oh, there's still hope. For me, I can still, beat Hashem, so to speak. But no, like Hashem's going to take that away from you too. And you're just literally left with no hope. And, another thing we don't appreciate nowadays is the fact that these locusts are are a source of food. People eat these. Um, and for Western culture, this is kind of like unusual, but I mean, lots of cultures around the world eat insects, right? And I mean, if you've ever eaten shrimp or lobster, I mean, it's the same thing. So it's like, what's the big deal? Obviously, it's not kosher by us, by Jews, but for sure, anyone else, like, whatever. As long as it's dead, fine. Um, so that was one thing. And so even though the locusts ate up the last of the crops, the Egyptians thought to themselves, well, at least we can eat the locusts. But when Pharaoh asked Moshe to daven for him and pray for him and ask Hashem to take away the locusts, Hashem did. Hashem took away all the locusts, and it says in the Torah that there was not one locust left in the land of Egypt. And he could have just said, the Torah could have just said that Hashem got rid of all the locusts, but why does it use this particular language to come and tell us that that even the locusts that they saved, in their houses, like they, I don't know, they pickled them, or I don't know what they did, right? They put them in containers for later. They saved it for later. Even those just like disappeared. Like Hashem just took out all the locusts. So now the Egyptians are literally just left with nothing, like no food at all. And just as another way for Hashem to express His ultimate oversight on everything and His ultimate control over everything, and just to remind the Egyptians where their sustenance truly comes from, is from Hashem. It's not from their own. It's not from their own efforts, because as you can see, they can try as much as they want, but you can't you can't top Hashem, right? So that's the significance of the locusts. And so what's the next Makkah? Is the Makkah of the darkness. And my Rav explains to me that this is not darkness in the sense that we know. Like, it's not a lack of light, right? That's what we think, right? Darkness is the lack of light, and if you just turn on the light, then the darkness, right, goes away. But this was not the case. It was a darkness like in the sense that a black hole is dark. The darkness itself was consuming the light, and it was a supernatural darkness, because we learn that the Jewish people did not experience this same kind of darkness. Like, they could see perfectly fine, which was the case for all the other plagues as well. Like, throughout the whole thing, the Jews were not affected by the plagues, except this one. Interestingly enough, even though they could see, it wasn't that they were punished with darkness. It was that the Jewish people, because unfortunately, the majority of Jewish people in Egypt had either assimilated or given up on any hopes for salvation, and they basically just conceded their success, or they conceded their fight and gave up, and just they gave up on I don't want to say like Judaism, because there was no Torah yet, but they gave up on any hope of getting out, and because of this, they had to stay. I mean, if they would rather stay, then they stayed, and they ended up dying in the plague of darkness. And it seems kind of like weird and out of place. It's like, why would Hashem just like do that now? Like, wouldn't there be a better time or better way to punish them? And I mean, the answer is no, because if the Egyptians were to see that the Jewish people were also being punished by these makot, then they would be able to. They wouldn't get the message that they're the targets. The Egyptians are the targets, and the Jewish people are the audience, in a way. So he had to put sort of like a blindfold on the Egyptians, so just to cover up like the shame of having to basically put your own children to death, to put it very frankly. That's what happened. Is like, it's like a father having to put his own children to death. That's what was happening, and so Hashem made it so dark and made it so that the Egyptians couldn't see. But it also served as a reminder to the other Jewish people that in this system of like Torah life, and this even goes for non-Jews, especially non-Jews, is there's no nepotism here. Okay, just because you're the king's son, just because you're the child of the king, doesn't mean you're exempt from the law. Doesn't mean you're above the law. And this is a very, very important thing for everyone to learn. Now, for Jews, it's important because we have to recognize that just because we are part of the covenant, just because our mom was Jewish or whatever, or like just because you converted and you have this little piece of paper or whatever, like that doesn't mean anything in terms of like you're standing in the based in or the court, the court of law in the upper worlds, right? It doesn't mean that you can't be held accountable for your actions. You most certainly will be held accountable for your actions, and it doesn't matter whether you're a Jew or a Gentile. Everyone is equal under the law of the Torah. But to save them from the shame, to save Hashem himself from the shame of having to, mete out judgment to his own children, he put a veil of darkness over the Egyptians. And just some more things about the darkness. It was like the way I learned it is they couldn't even move. Like there was like two stages of darkness. Like at first it was like just an impairment of sight. Like they just couldn't see where they were going. And then there was like stage 2, and with stage 2 it was like they couldn't move. Like it was the darkness actually became thick, and they were just like stuck, wherever they were. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, the Adam Sandler movie Click. If you haven't, don't watch it. It's terrible. But basically, there's these scenes where like he has like a remote, right? And the remote like basically controls reality. And so there's times where he like pause the world and he'll just like walk around and like move stuff, and that's basically what was happening. And it was during this time that the Jewish people would go and they would take voluntarily, they would take the silver and gold ornaments and whatever valuables from the Egyptians, because in order to fulfill the prophecy that Hashem gave to Abraham, that I can't quote it for you right now, but basically the idea is that the Jews won't leave empty-handed, pretty much. Like they'll have what to use, and like they'll have wealth. Like they won't be poor, right? They're not going to leave empty-handed. And so what ends up happening with this gold and silver, it ends up being used to build the tabernacle in the desert. So those are just the first 2 of the last 3 of the Makot. And so the last Makkah is the death of the firstborn. And this is really important to talk about because the Jewish people themselves are called the firstborn of the nations. And again, this is driving home, like you might ask yourself, like, the firstborn, like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, the Jewish people didn't become a nation until like after this time. Like, they're still not a nation. Like, what's the big deal? Well, Hashem's like reiterating the point, like, there's no nepotism here. Like, it's throughout history, throughout the whole Torah, throughout the whole book of Genesis, the younger child, it's common for the younger child to either steal the firstborn rights, or win over the firstborn rights, or maybe the actual firstborn son ends up forfeiting his rights to his younger brother. and all these things happen. So it's not like, in Egyptian culture, it's like you're just, oh, like your dad was the pharaoh, so that means you're the pharaoh. It's like, no, that doesn't mean anything. And it's similar to the plague of darkness, and how Hashem had to he had to enact or mete out judgment to his own children, to like basically make other people understand that it's a meritocracy here, right? Like there's no getting around that. Like you can only earn merit. You're never entitled to it. Even if you're part of this covenant, even if you're part of this covenant, part of this family, that doesn't mean anything. Like it doesn't mean anything if you're just gonna throw it away. And so that's the whole message. So this plague, or this makkah of the death of the firstborn, coincides with the commandment to bring a korban pesach, or the Passover offering. And the interesting thing about this Passover offering is that it was made with a lamb, a Passover lamb, and the Egyptians actually worshipped the lamb. So this was not only a sacrifice, like as the forefathers, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, like they brought sacrifices, and even other people from the nations brought sacrifices. Like this wasn't an unusual thing. But what was unusual was the fact that they were, precisely because they worshipped the lamb, that Hashem picked that as the kind of offering they were going to bring. And if you recall, if you're following along in the Parsha, if you recall, this is why Moshe had to tell Pharaoh, like, no, like, basically, like, Pharaoh's like, why can't you just do your little shindig here? Like, why do you have to go 3 days out into the desert to do this whole hootenanny? Like, and Moshe's like, well, because we're gonna sacrifice your God, and we do that, there's gonna be a whole to do about it, and it's gonna cause a lot of trouble. There's gonna be a whole ruckus. And this is exactly why, because they literally worshipped the lamb. So what did they do? They went and got a lamb from the field or wherever, and like, mind you, these lambs aren't that big, right? They can feed like a family of 4 or 5, I guess, and so you have like a bunch of different groups that all kind of pitch in for this one lamb. And so you can imagine, like, in the whole Jewish community, there's like one lamb per household, and and so you're going to get the lamb. They put a little leash on it, and they walk down the street. They're taking it home, and they tie it to their bedpost. And all you hear in the Jewish community, like the Egyptians, are walking around, and they're going through the Jewish parts of town, and all they hear is these like, meh, like like lambs like making noise, and they see like they're tied up to the in these Jewish people's homes, and they're like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing with that? And they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna put it on a stick and shecht it, and then we're gonna sacrifice it to our God. And at this point, they're just like, okay, whatever, man. Like, like, I don't, they already been through 9 plagues, and, half their family died because of the, firstborn. And another thing I forgot to mention was something that Rashi brings up in the Parsha, is that sometimes that there was more than one death in a family. And that, that begs the question, like, well, wasn't it only the firstborn? It's like, but maybe the wife or the husband was unfaithful. And so they're the firstborn by the other woman, or the firstborn by the other man. And this just highlights how, debased this culture was. And of course, like now in our society, like, even though we still witness this, unfortunately, we still witness infidelity. Like, this is not uncommon, unfortunately, but at least we understand now it's a reprehensible behavior. But I mean, back then maybe it wasn't so reprehensible. Maybe it was a little bit more normalized, and because of that, sometimes you'd have like 5 people in a family that just keel over and die, and it's like, oh wow, now the secret comes out. Like, yeah, your wife, your husband was fooling around. So that's just another, another point. And again, to reiterate and to really drive home the point that you really can't escape Hashem's oversight. Like, He knows everything, and He knows like exactly which seed, which cell entered who and what and when, and like who's the son of who. He knows like all that. Like, even if your wife was able to lie to you, your husband was able to lie to you and say like, oh no, this is your kid, whatever. Like, there something. I guess it would only be if the can only be if the wife cheated, because right, like, if it's the mother, like, yeah, or if you can only fool the father, like you can't fool the mother. The mother's gonna be like, I definitely didn't give birth to this kid. Okay, fine. Anyway, so back at the ranch. So in the death of the firstborn. I'm sorry. Yeah, the death of the firstborn coincided with the Pesach offering, the offering of the lamb, and this was just like the final blow, or the final nail in the coffin, so to speak. It's like by the Egyptian way of life, or by the Egyptian like mentality. And if they didn't get the message at this point, then they're just never gonna get the message, essentially. And I always found it funny that just like in this Egyptian avodah zarah, just like in like Egyptian mythology, they worship the lamb. I find it very, very funny and very interesting that Christians also worship the lamb. Hey, isn't that weird? Take that as you will. So like, what do we do? Like, same thing. We just put him up on a stick and you shechted him. Like, what do you get? What else are you gonna do? So, this is, the symbolism is just so crazy. And maybe that's something like you might be interested in looking into yourself. But like the parallels between Christianity and the Egyptian mythology is actually insane. And it's yeah. I mean, that's not for here. But yeah. So this concludes the whole episode of the 10 plagues, and the Parashat continues, and we go through the Red Sea. And I mean, there's plenty of symbolism and interesting stuff there to talk about, but I wanted to also talk about the upcoming holiday that is occurring tonight and tomorrow by Chabad specifically. If you're by Chabad, you'll know that tonight is Yud Shvat. And Yud Shvat is when the previous Rebbe, Rebbe Yosef Yitzchak, passed away, and then Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson took office, or took the lead, albeit reluctantly. He took the lead, and this was, and he gave a famous mimer, or a famous I don't know how you say like in English, but like a speech or a lecture about a verse from, it's called Basi Lagani. It's a verse from Song of Songs, and it's very, if you want to look at that on your own time, I'm not the guy to talk about that at all, but it's very, very deep. But why I want to bring this up, especially for Noachides, is what like the Rebbe's mission was all about. And like, I'm a Lubavitcher Chassid, and so like I'm kind of biased to that stuff, but even in the Jewish world at large, I really do believe, I really do think that the Rebbe and his campaign is of mitzvahim, which means just like going out and like spreading mitzvahs and getting Jews to do mitzvahs, paired with his passion for the nations, for the nations of the world, the non-Jewish people, his deep love and care for every single human being on this planet. It changed Judaism. It revolutionized Judaism, and I think it really brought our world into a different stage. like in progress, like in world history. And I know that personally. I have a very personal like kind of experience that I'd like to just quickly share because I don't have much more time. I always like end up doing this. But very quickly, I started learning about Judaism in college, very, very informally. And Chabad.org was one of the uh, first kosher outlets of information that I was able to find. And, I had a lot of questions and I didn't have very many answers. And every time I looked online, I would find a bunch of schmutz. Like I would find like Christian schmutz and like New Agey stuff. And, I didn't know anything about the Torah or about the Bible or anything, but I knew like that was not like legit. But until I went to Chabad.org and I was reading crazy stuff like I probably shouldn't be reading, but like I got the answers I wanted. And I from then on, like Chabad.org was like my go-to place for information. And I always will be indebted to the Rebbe and his mission, because if it wasn't for him, there would be no. If it wasn't for him and his idea, his mission, and his passion to spread Judaism and make it available to like the simplest person, then I would never have been able to learn or really get in touch with the people I've been in touch with, or access the things I've been able to access. And I wouldn't be here today given the shir if it wasn't for Chabad. So and mind you, like that was all happening before I even considered conversion or anything. So even as a Noachide, like I really found that to be a foundational part of my spiritual growth. And like, why do I bring this up? Like, why, not just because of the proximity to the holiday, but I think this has everything to do with the Parsha. Because what is like, it sounds like cruel. The Parsha sounds cruel, the Makot, and like he's killing Jewish people too. Like, what's the Vart here? Like, what's the Pshat? The Pshat is that, you can't, there's no free rides, on the Zion train, as they say. It's not like you just get a golden ticket and, it's not Willy Wonka, This is not, right, like, this is real, like, work that you have to do. And if you're not about it, like, we don't need you, like, you know what I mean? Like, just get out of here. Like, if you're just going to get in the way. And, this sounds like a very, like, cut and dry or a very cold approach, but as you will see, and if you continue reading, which I would encourage, if you continue reading the Parshas, you get to, several instances, like in the desert, when the Jews are actually in the desert. Like one instance is the golden calf. We learned that the Erev Rav was a group of non-Jews who decided to come along with Moses, and they basically figured out that the Jewish people knew what they were doing. And so they decided to come along. And they ended up really messing it up for everyone because they instigated the sin of the golden calf. So that's like one thing. And then another thing is a couple of guys by the name of Datan and Aviram, and they also, brought, I think it was them who brought the incense in an improper time. And, no, it wasn't. I don't think it was them. I'm thinking of a different story. But they basically, brought the Jewish people down a level from literally hearing God speak. And it was all these, different things where it's like, this is why you don't want to have undue influence from undesirable people, right? So this is the whole story. So like, what does it have to do with your Shvat, like the Rebbe? Like, what does it have to do? Is to say that even though it's easy to say like, oh, well, I'm not Jewish, so I don't have to do XYZ, or it's not important for me to learn, or it's like I don't feel like that. Like God forbid, Hash Shalom, because like Hashem made you into a person, and Hashem like woke you up this morning, and that's proof enough that you have a mission in life. And even if it's to do like one thing, like you do one good deed for one person, maybe that's like your whole purpose, but that's worth your whole life. And the fact that you made it here today, and like you're awake and you're living, like that's proof enough. And there's something that we tell, like there's in the Haggadah, that there's a thing we read on Passover. It's called the Haggadah, and it's telling over the story of the of Passover. And there's a part where we talk about four different sons that ask like four different questions. And one of the sons is a what's called a wicked son, right? And he's not really like wicked. He's just called wicked. This is what he's called. Okay, and so he asks, like, what's the big deal? Like, what is this thing to you? As if it's not to him. Also, he's like, what is this festival to you? And the parent is supposed to respond, and it says something like weird, like you knock out his teeth and you tell him like, if the Exodus happened today, like you wouldn't be redeemed. And it just kind of ends off like that, and it sounds like a really like rude kind of rebuke, and it is a rebuke, but there's deeper meaning to it, because yeah, maybe it's true that if the Exodus were to happen today, yeah, maybe you wouldn't have made it, but guess what? You did make it. Your soul made it this far, so don't take it for granted. That is specifically by a Jew. But I think by a non-Jew as well. Like if Hashem like decided to wake you up this morning, don't take that for granted. Like feel encouraged, and find strength in that, and really allow it to give you strength in your journey, because it's it's hard out there trying to be a loyal, I want to say like a person to Hashem. Like you're trying to keep the Noahide laws when literally like the rest of society is like not, right? And so I understand where that becomes very, very difficult. So and Hashem certainly understands that too, because he put you in this situation, right? So if you find yourself in a tough spot and you can't find your place, and like you really you're struggling to be spiritually aligned, don't get so discouraged. Like the fact that you exist is proof enough that Hashem wants you, and Hashem is interested in your involvement in this world, and he wants you to be a partner in his creation, and that's proof enough. And this is something that the Rebbe himself really brought to light in the public eye. He made it very open and very public. And there's a lot of resources on Chabad.org, and again, like I'm biased because I'm in it. I'm in the gang, so like of course like I'm biased, but it's just true. It's just objectively true. And so this Shabbos we're gonna talk about a lot of deep things. Definitely talk about the Mimer of Basi Legani, but also we should all be mindful and keep in mind the impact that the Rebbe had, not just on the Jewish people, but on the world at large. And when we, not just Jews, but also non-Jews, and all the people in the world realize that they have a place in this world, and they have a mission, and then they have a purpose, then we can actually start working towards that purpose. And we should all be ultimately, we should all merit to see the final result of that hard work with the coming of Mashiach, Tzidkenu B'meira V'Amenu. And if we have any questions, I'll take them. But if not, have a good Shabbos.